This could lead to pain in the shoulder, and also if you are the type of person where you play sports and you play any type of throwing or pushing sports, so something like a pitcher in baseball, or if you are a boxer, this could lead to a lot of problems if you have some type of weakness or tautness in the serratus anterior. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and today I'm going to be demonstrating some exercises to help with your shoulder, mid, back, and neck pain. And this comes at the request of Baraka MK, and Baraka asks, hey bro, could you do a video on developing the serratus? Well, yes, I absolutely can, and I'm really glad that you asked me to make this video because this is a muscle that often gets overlooked, and one of the reasons why the serratus anterior gets overlooked is because it's not a very sexy looking muscle like your abdominals or your biceps. However, it is a very important muscle in a clinical setting. Before I actually get into the exercises, I would first like to go over the anatomy of the serratus anterior, and in order to do that, I'm going to enlist in the help of my good friend, Johnny Bones. So Johnny, get right over here, and let's get into the anatomy. With regard to the serratus anterior, it's going to originate at the anterolateral surfaces of the upper 9 ribs, so ribs 1 to 9. Anterolateral meaning anterior in the front, and lateral away from the midline. With regard to the actual origin, we could further subdivide this into the superior fibers, the intermediate fibers, and then the inferior fibers. The superior fibers are going to originate at ribs 1 and 2, and those fibers are going to run in a downward diagonal direction. Then the intermediate fibers are going to attach to ribs 3 and 4, and those fibers are going to be running in more of a horizontal direction. And then lastly, we have the inferior fibers. The inferior fibers are going to attach from ribs 5 all the way down to 9, and this is going to be the largest portion of the serratus anterior, and those fibers are going to run on more of an upward diagonal. Then from there, they are going to insert right into the posteromedial aspect of the scapula. Specifically, it's going to end up attaching to the anterior portion of the entire medial border of the scapula. We have the posterior surface, which is going to be on the back end, and then the anterior surface is the part that you can't see because you would have to dig in with your fingers. So if you were to palpate on a client or a patient, if you were to take your fingers and hook it into the scapula, you would be palpating the serratus anterior. Now, with regard to this part right over here, we once again can further subdivide the actual fibers. We can break it down into the superior, the intermediate, and the inferior fibers. The superior fibers are going to attach at the superior angle and also the medial border. The intermediate fibers are going to attach to the medial border, and then the inferior fibers are going to attach at the medial border and the inferior angle of the scapula. Now, let's get into the actual actions of the serratus anterior. Because the serratus anterior is going to attach from anterior to posterior, what's going to happen is when the muscle contracts, it is going to bring the posterior attachment more anteriorly. And then, because a lot of the fibers are also running in this more of an upward diagonal, what's going to happen is when those fibers contract, it is going to end up bringing the scapula out. So two of its main actions are going to be protraction of the scapula, and then it's also going to be responsible for upward rotation of the scapula, because again, the fibers, because they are going to be going more anteriorly, when it pulls, it's going to bring the scapula away from the midline, which is going to be protraction. And because most of the fibers are running on this vertical diagonal, when those fibers contract, it is going to bring the inferior angle of the scapula out and up, which is upward rotation of the scapula. But those are just the two main actions. The serratus anterior also does a lot of accessory actions, meaning they're not its main function, but it does still do these movements. Some of the accessory actions that is going to be performed by the serratus anterior: number one, every single fiber, it doesn't matter if it's the anterior, the intermediate, or the inferior fibers, they are all going to be responsible for medially tilting the scapula. The scapula, this right over here, and medially tilting, meaning it's going to bring the border of the scapula closer toward the rib cage. Now, aside from that, if we look at the superior fibers, because the superior fibers are going to run more on an incline, what's going to happen is when those muscles contract, it is going to bring the border of the scapula, the superior border, it is going to elevate it. So it's going to be responsible for elevation of the scapula. And then if we look at the inferior fibers, because the inferior fibers start inferiorly and then they come superiorly to the medial border and the inferior angle, when those muscles contract, it is going to be responsible for bringing the inferior angle more inferiorly. So it's going to be responsible for depression of the scapula, and also it is going to be responsible for downwardly tilting the inferior angle of the scapula. Then, now that we've actually determined where does it attach and what does it do, what exactly is the clinical significance of this muscle? Well, if you have any type of dysfunction in the serratus anterior, whether it be either really, really weak or really, really taut, this could lead to a lot of issues. One of the issues that can arise is you can develop a winging of the scapula. Winging of the scapula is when the scapula, this bone right over here, it ends up moving away from the rib cage. And if you recall, one of the actions of the serratus anterior is medially tilting the actual scapula. So if you have a lateral tilt, by strengthening the muscles that medially tilt the scapula, which would be the serratus anterior, this could help to correct something like winging of the scapula. Another problem that could arise is subacromial impingement. This is going to happen when you end up getting these altered lines of pull in the rotator cuff muscle. And this could lead to pain in the shoulder. And also, if you are the type of person where you play sports and you play any type of throwing or pushing sports, so something like a pitcher in baseball, or if you are a boxer, this could lead to a lot of problems if you have some type of weakness or tautness in the serratus anterior. Then another thing would be serratus anterior muscle pain syndrome, which you're going to develop these trigger points because the muscle is going to be overly taut. And then this can lead to a lot of pain in between the shoulder blades. So if you find that you get a lot of pain in the shoulder blades, it could be originating from the serratus anterior. Another thing is you could develop medial epicondylitis. Medial epicondylitis, better known as golfer's elbow, is when the medial condyle of the humerus becomes inflamed and then it gets really, really irritated. Another thing that could arise is you could develop some rib pain, and you could also develop some arm pain, but all of this can arise from dysfunction in the serratus anterior. And now that we've discussed the anatomy and some of the clinical significance with regard to the serratus anterior, let's get into the exercises. I'm going to be showing you different variations to strengthen the serratus anterior, and I'm going to be showing you how to emphasize different fibers. So we're going to be going over the superior fibers, the intermediate fibers, and the inferior fibers, and also how to train the more lateral fibers and the more medial fibers. With regard to the superior fibers, so the ones that are higher up, what we want to do is we're going to get in a quadruped position. So this is a 4-point position, your tabletop position. You want to get on your hands and knees, and then for this one, because the serratus anterior is responsible mainly for protraction and also for upwardly tilting the scapula, we want to do protraction as the main action for the exercise. And the reason we're in a kneeling position right now is because we want to eliminate as much core activation as possible to get as much recruitment of the serratus anterior. So we get into our 4-point, and then from this position over here, if we want to emphasize the superior fibers, what we want to do is bring our humerus, or our upper arm bone, below the level of the shoulder. By bringing the humerus below the level of the shoulder, what happens is we're going to create greater myofascial tension along the superior fibers of the serratus anterior, and that's going to allow for greater recruitment of the superior fibers. So this is for the superior fibers of the serratus anterior. 4-point position. You're going to bring your arms below, and you can bring it into external rotation to make it a little bit more comfortable on your hands. And then from here, all you want to do is you are going to keep your chin tucked in, push the crown of your head out away that way. You want to try to maintain a neutral curve in your spine. You're allowed to have a little bit of kyphosis in your thoracic spine, so if your upper spine does start to round, that's not really a problem. And then you want to look down between your thighs to put the dura mater under tension. And then the principle of action for this exercise is you are going to protract your scapula. So you are going to push into the floor and then come back. And this is how you strengthen the serratus anterior, specifically the superior fibers of the serratus anterior. Next, if we want to target more the intermediate fibers, with this one, the humerus, we want it in line with the shoulder. So our arms should be perpendicular to the ground. So we're going to get in our 4-point position once again. This time, the wrist and shoulder is stacked up nicely on top of one another, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to protract, so push into the ground, and then come back up. So push, and then drop back down to the floor. And then if we want to target more the inferior fibers, what we're going to do for the inferior fibers is the exact opposite of the superior. We're going to bring our humerus and go more into flexion. That way we create greater myofascial tension along the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior, which is going to allow for greater recruitment of the serratus anterior in the inferior fibers. So same thing, we are in our 4-point position, neutral spine, chin tucked in, crown of the head up, eyes looking down between the thighs to put the dura mater under tension. And we're going to do the exact same thing. So we're going to get our arms in a more flexed position, and then we are going to go into protraction and then come back. And this is to target the serratus anterior, specifically the inferior fibers. Next, what if we want to target the lateral fibers, meaning away from the midline? Well, if we bring our hands closer together, what's going to happen is we're going to create greater myofascial tension on the lateral aspect of the serratus anterior, which means we're going to get greater recruitment of those fibers. So if we want to target the lateral fibers, what we would do is the exact same exercise, only we bring our hands closer together so we can stack our palms on top of one another. So I'm going to get into my 4-point. Everything else is exactly the same. Neutral spine, chin tucked in, crown of the head out, eyes looking down between the thighs to put the dura mater under tension. And this time we are going to bring our palms together. So I'm going to bring one hand in the middle and then place the other over top. And the principle of action is the exact same thing. We're going to go ahead and push into the floor and protract our scapula. And that is how we are going to target more the lateral fibers of the serratus anterior. And then if we want to target more the medial fibers, it's the exact opposite. So instead of stacking them on top, we're going to go outside of our shoulder width. So everything else is exactly the same. Neutral spine, chin tucked in, crown of the head up, eyes looking down between our thighs to put the dura mater under tension. And the principle of action for this one is we're going to place our hands outside of our shoulder width, and we are going to go into protraction. And this is how we are going to target the medial fibers of the serratus anterior. Now, with regard to this exercise, there are different ways that we can progress it. One of the ways that we can progress it is by using some bands. So with all of the different positions, if you were to take a band and put it on your spine, then we will be able to load the segmental strengthening and reinforcement exercise for the serratus anterior. So everything is going to be the exact same, only this time we are able to add a little bit of resistance. And then if it's still not challenging enough and you want to add a little bit more resistance, one other thing that you could do is incorporate something like a weight vest. The reason that I like using bands and weight vests for strengthening the serratus anterior is because you're not going to be using a lot of recruitment of other muscles. Another way that you could progress it would be to get into a push-up position. However, I find that if you are in a push-up position, a lot of people are not going to have the core strength required to maintain that position for too long. So a lot of people, they're going to end up emphasizing their abdominals rather than focusing on the serratus anterior, whereas when you're in a tabletop position, you really eliminate a lot of the core recruitment that's involved. So by eliminating the core, you're able to emphasize the serratus anterior a lot more. So if you are going to do this exercise and you want to find a way to increase the load or increase the difficulty, that would be one thing that I would suggest. Instead of going in a push-up position, do it body weight at first, then you could progress to bands. Once you've done bands, you could either put a weight plate on your back or get a weight vest just to load it a little bit more. But that is how we would strengthen the serratus anterior. And with regard to the sets and repetitions, depending on what exactly you are trying to do, that's going to dictate the sets and repetitions. Most people, if you're trying to use this as an exercise to improve something like posture and function, 3 sets of 50 repetitions, that's 5-0, not 1-5. The reason we're doing such high repetitions is because when we are trying to elicit a postural change, we want to accumulate enough time under tension. And if we're doing the typical 8 to 12 bodybuilding repetition rep range, we're not going to be able to accumulate enough time under tension. So 3 sets of 50 repetitions would be ideal for eliciting a postural change. But that is just a few exercises that we can do for serratus anterior. If you have issues with either shoulder pain, winging of the scapula, or if you have mid-back pain, definitely go ahead and give this exercise a shot. It's a terrific exercise, but that's pretty much it for today's video. If you guys have any other suggestions or any other videos that you would like me to do with regard to exercise demonstrations, go ahead and drop your comments down in the comment section. I will make a video for you guys, but that's pretty much it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to continue making these exercise demonstration videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.